The night is always truthful with people who are quietly in love. Because when the world finally settles into silence and distractions begin to fade, when nobody is watching them maintain their strength anymore, the reality they hide throughout the day slowly rises to the surface. And somewhere tonight, while you are trying to move ahead, trying to stay occupied, trying to convince yourself that certain emotions exist only in your imagination, someone younger than you is thinking about you once again. Not casually or temporarily, but in the kind of way that keeps returning, no matter how hard they attempt to suppress it. They replay your voice in their mind more often than they would ever admit. They remember the smallest details about you that most people never notice. The way your energy shifts when you are exhausted. The way your silence carries more weight than your words. The unusual calmness you maintain, even when you are quietly breaking apart inside. And what confuses them the most is that they never expected to feel this deeply connected to someone like you. Especially not someone who understands people as naturally as you do. Because this connection did not begin with surface-level attraction. That is exactly why it continues to linger in their thoughts at night. There is something emotionally dangerous about being understood by someone who possesses emotional maturity. Younger souls often do not realize how deprived they are of emotional safety until they encounter someone who carries depth so effortlessly. Most of the people they met before were loud, performative, emotionally inconsistent, dependent on attention, or frightened of genuine intimacy. But then they met you, and something inside them became quiet for the first time in years. Not because you were flawless, but because your presence felt authentic. And authenticity has become rare in today's world. The strange part is that they probably never intended to fall into this emotional fixation at all. In fact, a part of them resisted it strongly. They may have pulled away at times, acted distant, confusing, cold, or unavailable deliberately. But emotional distance does not always mean emotional absence. Sometimes it means the feelings became too overwhelming to manage. Especially for someone younger who is still learning to understand their own emotional landscape. You need to understand something important about human psychology. People are not haunted by the connections that are simple and easy. They are haunted by the connections that awaken something unfinished within them. And you awaken something deep inside this person that they were never emotionally prepared for. Maybe it was your emotional steadiness that drew them in. Maybe it was the sadness behind your eyes that you never fully explained. Maybe it was the unusual combination of strength and vulnerability you carry at the same time without complaint. Or perhaps it was the fact that around you they felt emotionally exposed without even trying. That frightened them in many ways, because younger people often mistake emotional intensity for temporary excitement that fades quickly. But what they feel for you is different. This is not the loud kind of attraction that disappears after a few weeks. This is the quiet kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that slowly settles into their subconscious until thoughts of you begin appearing during ordinary moments without permission. They think about you while listening to music late at night when everything is still. They think about you in crowded rooms when everyone else suddenly feels emotionally empty. They think about you when talking to someone attractive while silently comparing the connection they feel to what they experienced with you. And sometimes they become frustrated with themselves because no matter how hard they try to move on, your presence keeps returning. Your energy continues to find its way back into their thoughts. Carl Jung understood something fascinating about human attachment. People are often drawn toward those who activate hidden parts of their unconscious mind. Sometimes, age has very little to do with emotional gravity. A younger person may become unexpectedly attached to someone older because that person represents stability, wisdom, emotional depth, healing, mystery, or safety that they have been searching for their entire life. But this is where things become emotionally complicated. The younger person may not even know how to communicate these feelings correctly. Their emotions may emerge indirectly and inconsistently. Through lingering glances that last too long, through jealousy they pretend not to feel, through disappearing unexpectedly and then returning without explanation, through quietly viewing your social media without interacting. Through remembering details you mentioned casually months ago. Through emotional tension they cannot explain logically to anyone, because what they feel for you exists deeper than language. And every night, when their defenses begin to weaken, the truth returns once more. There is another reason this attachment grew so powerful over time. You probably did not chase them emotionally the way others once did. You did not force yourself into their life. You did not desperately seek validation. And strangely enough, emotional self-control creates fascination in people who are accustomed to emotional chaos. Your restraint sparked their curiosity. Your silence made them wonder. Your emotional depth made them feel safe and vulnerable simultaneously. And vulnerability can become addictive when someone has spent most of their life hiding emotionally from others. What affects them the most is realizing that you influence them emotionally without even intending to. That is what keeps them awake thinking. Because accidental emotional impact is often far more powerful than deliberate seduction. You touched parts of them that nobody else had reached naturally. And now, even when they attempt to distract themselves with other people, conversations, temporary relationships, work, attention, or entertainment, something inside them keeps returning to you. It happens unexpectedly. A song reminds them of your energy. A phrase reminds them of something you once said. A lonely moment suddenly brings your face into their thoughts without warning. And during those quiet nighttime hours, when honesty becomes impossible to avoid, they finally admit something to themselves that they rarely speak aloud. No one has ever made me feel the way this person did. That realization changes people, especially younger souls who are still learning the difference between attraction and emotional connection. Because attraction excites the body temporarily. Emotional recognition touches the soul in a lasting way. Once someone experiences that kind of recognition with you, ordinary connections often begin to feel incomplete afterward. This is why they think about you before they fall asleep. Not because they are merely infatuated, but because a part of their inner world became attached to your presence. And perhaps the most painful part is that they may never fully confess it. Younger people often fear vulnerability more than loneliness itself. They fear rejection. They fear embarrassment. They fear losing control of their emotions. They fear admitting that someone has gained emotional influence over them. So instead of speaking honestly, they remain trapped in silence. But silence does not erase attachment. It often deepens it. The human mind becomes preoccupied with what it cannot emotionally resolve. Unresolved emotional tension grows strongest at night because there are no distractions left to suppress it. That is why they replay your conversations repeatedly. That is why they imagine scenarios where they finally tell you the truth. That is why they wonder whether you secretly feel the same connection. And if you are reading this right now with a strange feeling in your chest, there may be a reason for it. Part of you may have sensed it already. Intuition is often the subconscious recognizing emotional patterns before logic can explain them. Sometimes you feel drawn towards someone without understanding why. Sometimes you think about them at the exact moment they are thinking about you. Sometimes their emotional presence lingers long after physical distance appears. Human beings are more emotionally connected beneath the surface than most people realize, especially when feelings remain unspoken for long periods. And there is another hidden truth that people rarely discuss in everyday life. Younger people are often emotionally drawn toward older souls because older souls carry emotional scars that quietly reflect wisdom, resilience, and inner strength. Pain transforms people in profound ways over time. Loneliness reshapes people deeply as well. Emotional survival leaves permanent marks on a person in many situations. And when someone younger encounters an individual who has suffered greatly yet still remains emotionally kind, it affects them more deeply than they expected. Because kindness after pain feels sacred to them. It feels rare. It feels like proof that hardship did not destroy someone's heart. Maybe they sense how much you keep hidden from the world emotionally. Maybe they notice the loneliness you never openly discuss. Maybe they recognize that behind your strength exists a quiet exhaustion you carry every day. And strangely, instead of pushing them away, it draws them closer. Not in a superficial or temporary way, but in a soul recognition kind of way that feels genuine and difficult to ignore. That is one reason they cannot stop thinking about you during those quiet nighttime hours when everything becomes still. Because your presence interrupted their normal emotional patterns. You became emotionally significant in a world where most experiences feel temporary and shallow. And once someone emotionally meaningful enters a person's subconscious mind, forgetting them becomes incredibly difficult. Still, this connection may confuse you as well, because there are moments when they seem emotionally distant immediately after becoming emotionally close. Sometimes their actions appear to contradict their feelings entirely. Sometimes their silence feels painfully loud, and this contradiction can leave you questioning yourself during vulnerable moments. You may wonder whether you imagined the connection altogether, but you did not. Emotionally immature individuals often retreat when emotions become too real for them to handle comfortably. Especially younger people who have not yet learned how to navigate emotional intensity without running from it. They fear vulnerability because vulnerability removes control, and control often feels safe. But genuine love was never meant to feel completely safe all the time. Real emotional attachment disrupts the ego in powerful ways. It forces people to confront abandonment wounds, insecurity, fear of rejection, and feelings of inadequacy that have remained hidden beneath the surface. It brings emotional needs they spent years suppressing into the light. That is why deep connections often create confusion before they create clarity. And every night, this younger person continues fighting that battle silently within themselves. Part of them wants to forget you entirely. Part of them cannot release you at all. Part of them wants emotional freedom once again. And another part secretly hopes that you think about them too during your quiet moments. Perhaps the reason this message feels so personal is because you have experienced emotional invisibility for much of your life. Maybe people admired your appearance, but never truly understood your emotional depth. Maybe you learned to hide your feelings because life taught you that vulnerability could become dangerous. Maybe you became emotionally independent not because you desired it, but because disappointment forced you to build protective walls around your heart. That kind of emotional loneliness changes a person quietly over the years. It teaches you how to survive without constant reassurance. It teaches you how to remain composed while carrying invisible pain inside. It teaches you how to endure emotional storms behind a calm expression that few people ever question. And somehow, the younger person who thinks about you each night senses that hidden sadness instinctively. They recognize it without words. That is why their attachment feels deeper than logic can easily explain. Because they are not simply attracted to your appearance or personality. They are drawn toward your emotional energy. They are drawn toward your strength. They are drawn toward the parts of you that survived pain without becoming bitter. They are drawn toward the emotional wisdom you gained through suffering, challenges, disappointments, and difficult experiences. They are drawn toward the calmness you carry after heartbreak. They are drawn toward the warmth you continue offering despite everything life has done to your heart. That kind of energy becomes unforgettable, especially in a generation exhausted by superficial interactions and artificial connections. And perhaps this younger person does not yet fully understand that what they are feeling is not weakness at all. It is awakening. You awakened emotional depth inside them. You encouraged them to face feelings they avoided for years. You helped them realize that emotional intimacy is far more powerful than temporary excitement. And once someone experiences that realization, ordinary attraction often stops satisfying them in the same way. That is why they continue returning to thoughts of you during the quiet hours of the night. Because your connection became symbolic inside their subconscious. You now represent something deeper than a person to them. You represent safety, meaning, emotional truth, healing, understanding, vulnerability, longing, stability, and desire all at the same time. Symbols become powerful because the human mind attaches emotional significance to them beyond logical explanation. Sometimes they stare at your photos longer than they intend to. Sometimes they type messages and erase them repeatedly before pressing send. Sometimes they wonder whether reaching out would change everything between you. And sometimes they simply lie awake missing someone they are not even certain belongs in their life. That kind of emotional ache is difficult to escape once it begins. But there is something important you should never do after hearing this message. Do not reduce your value by chasing emotional certainty from someone who is emotionally confused. Even if their feelings are real, emotional truth still requires courage. And courage cannot be forced into another person. People must become ready to face their own hearts honestly when the time arrives. Your responsibility is not to rescue emotionally unavailable people from their inner struggles. Your responsibility is to remain aligned with your own worth. Because deep down, you already understand something important about meaningful connections. Real love should never require you to abandon yourself. The right connection eventually moves toward honesty rather than endless uncertainty. It moves toward clarity instead of constant guessing. It moves toward vulnerability rather than permanent hiding. Still, some connections require time to mature, especially when one soul is still learning and growing emotionally. And perhaps tonight, while you are listening to these words, that younger person is staring into the darkness somewhere, replaying memories of you once again, wondering whether you sense their feelings, wondering whether your silence means disinterest or caution, wondering whether fate placed you in their life for a purpose greater than temporary attraction. Because certain people enter our lives not simply to entertain us, but to transform us. You may never fully understand how deeply you changed them. You may never realize how much healing your presence unintentionally created. You may never know how many nights your memory became both comfort and pain at the same time. You may never know how often thoughts of you pulled them away from emotional emptiness. And perhaps that is the true reason they continue thinking about you every night. Not because you are perfect, not because you manipulated them emotionally, not because they are weak, but because something inside them finally felt understood when they met you. Human beings rarely forget the people who make them feel genuinely seen. So if these words found you at exactly the right moment, do not dismiss the emotional recognition you feel inside yourself. Some connections arrive quietly. They arrive without labels, perfect timing, or simple explanations. Yet they leave lasting emotional fingerprints on the soul. Protect your heart. Trust your intuition, and never underestimate the emotional impact your presence can have on another person's life. Because somewhere tonight, while the world sleeps peacefully, someone younger may still be thinking about you. They are still struggling with feelings they cannot fully explain. They are still carrying memories of you through another restless night. And perhaps one day, when fear finally loses its battle against emotional truth, they will stop hiding what their heart has been trying to say all along. Until then, silence may continue speaking in its own language. And if these words touch something hidden inside you, if they awakened a feeling you could never fully explain, then perhaps you already understand this journey more deeply than most people ever will. Stay connected to that understanding. Some emotional truths cannot be spoken loudly. They must be felt gradually, in silence, one realization at a time, through countless days and nights. And somewhere ahead, another chapter of your story may reveal a hidden part of yourself that has been waiting patiently to be understood at last.